So Dan, I wanted to let you know we do have a quorum.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and start. Is Carly here? Are you doing the roll call?
It's me.
Okay.
She's out today.
All right. We're gonna get started. Can you do a roll call for me, Veronica?
Yeah. Aaliyah Armstrong. Faith Dayton.
Present.
Teresa DeSimone.
Here.
Jacqueline Williams. She was here. And she's having trouble. Jackie, are you able to unmute? I'm going to keep going and come back to Jackie. Wynn Novotny.
Here.
Anyone from McCavan? Joanna.
Joanna, I'm here.
Thank you. Paul Davis.
Here.
Anyone from Mendocino Community Health Clinics? Karen Lovato.
I'm here.
Blythe Post or Brady Nord? Amanda Archer. Judy Albert.
Present.
Sage Wolf.
Here.
Dan McIntyre.
Here.
Sandra Stolfi.
Here.
Sarah McCormick or anyone with the city of Fort Bragg? Paul Anderson or anyone from the city of Point Arena? James Watson with Home Again? Elizabeth Elliott? Or anyone from Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority? Denise Gorney?
Here.
And Jackie, I just admitted you again. Are you present? Can you hear us? Without Jackie, we don't have a quorum.
Drew's here too.
With her computer, but she's there.
She's
Veronica, Drew's here. She can,
Oh, Drew. Excellent.
oh, Drew got
She's
Jackie
coming in.
fixed. Drew got Jackie fixed.
Hi, I'm in here, and I got Jackie fixed.
Okay, excellent. Okay.
Sorry.
And I see that Hannah Nanez from the Care Response Unit with City of Fort Bragg is present. Are you able to unmute, Hannah? Because it's a Zoom meeting and we can hear you. And if you're on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute.
Hello, I do have volume, yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to record you as the representative for the City of Fort Bragg. Okay, and we have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Veronica. Did you receive any public comment in your email?
I received no requests for advance written public comment.
Is there any public comment from anybody present here now? That's not on a topic that's covered below? Sage?
I just wanted to thank Veronica for sending out, there was an email this morning about emergency weather measures that was set out or that she forwarded from the state. And I just want to, I don't know, bring to the table the not discussion, because I know it's not agendized, so we can't actually talk about it or anything, but emergency weather stuff right now might be a little pertinent. I know we're getting a clear day today, but the rain is going to return heavy again. And I was realizing I don't think I have a clear idea of, like, other than our existing shelters, if there's warming centers or anything that is in addition during these hard weather times for our folks who are on the street.
Thanks, Sage.
Yeah.
Any other public comment?
I'd like to just respond to Sage's inquiry. The County of Mendocino has opened the Emergency Operations Center. And so if you call, I think probably call the COVID hotline, the call center there, I bet it's merged. So if that's different, then I'll let you know. I'm not 100% sure the direct number for that specific disaster, but I know it is available. And
Thank
that's
you.
all.
Any other public comment that's not tied to something on the agenda? Are you not seeing? We need to approve the minutes from October 17th from the full membership meeting.
I move to approve the minutes from the January the 17th meeting.
Is there a second? Thank you, Jackie. Is there any discussion or public comment on that? Not hearing any. Veronica, roll call, please.
Yes. When I
And
call
I'll
your
give you that
name,
number in a second.
okay. When I call your name, please say yes, no, or abstain to approving the minutes from October 17th, 22. Faith Dayton,
Abstain.
Teresa DeSimone,
Yes.
Jacqueline Williams,
Yes.
Lynn Novotny,
Abstain.
Joanna Olson, Joanna with McCavan. I'm going to say abstain. Paul Davis,
Abstain.
Karen Lovato,
Yes.
Judy Albert,
Here,
do you approve of the minutes?
yes, yes, I approve.
Thank you.
Sorry, this is Joanne. I just stepped back to my desk.
Do you
Yeah,
approve
I approve.
of the October minutes?
Thank you.
Sage Wolf,
Approve.
Dan McIntyre,
Yes.
Sandra Stolfi, Hannah Nanas,
Abstain.
and Denise Corney.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you, Veronica. Hannah had asked in the chat what the COVID hotline number is. Do you or Megan have that available?
I could look it up, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay, we'll provide that here in a little bit if somebody can find that.
I'll find it and put in the chat.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
May. Actually, just give it to us in our video. We're not supposed to use the chat for,
Yeah.
I will also say it verbally.
thank you.
So Hannah, could you not use the chat and speak up whenever you have questions? Thank you.
Just so I don't get in trouble for Brown Act violations. Reports and presentation. I'll move down to updates from local jurisdictions. County of Mendocino, Karen or Megan, I don't know who wants to start.
I think the only announcement that I have, Veronica already covered with the Emergency Operations Center being open for the flooding and just general awareness for that. I was able to find the COVID call center number is 707-472-2759. I don't see a hotline number for the Emergency Operations Center being open. Most of what was in the press release was really just links to the monitoring of the various different flood stages for different bridges and other major ways, high wind watches, debris warnings, and then making sure that folks have the PG&E number for reporting out or 911 for downed power lines. The PG&E number is 1-800-743-5002. And those are available on, I believe they're available on the county website. They're available on the county's Facebook page. And I'm not sure about Twitter, but definitely the Facebook page for more information about the Emergency Operations Center opening related to the weather. That's what I had. Do you have more?
Do me for the county?
Yeah, sorry, Megan, you have more for the county?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think there's any significant updates on my end. Our Front Door for Families initiative funded by the Family Homelessness Challenge Grant, which is also pulling and bringing families home as well, is getting closer to being launched. We have hired our primary staff person for that project, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a more formal announcement in the next couple of weeks and be ready to accept referrals.
Thank you, Megan and Karen. Is there any questions on their update? Not seeing any questions. We're gonna move on to the city of Ukiah. Shannon. I think Shannon's here someplace. There she is.
I'm here. Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everybody. Just a couple quick updates from us. First, on the police chief recruitment process, we have closed the recruitment period and selected some top candidates. So in about a month, we'll be doing interviews. It'll be a two-part interview process. One will be a group with stakeholders from the community representing all kinds of segments of the community, including this group. And then one with the ad hoc committee that consists of city council members, city staff, and a few others. So looking forward to getting some closure on that process. And then also in good housing news, the Danko project on East Gobi Street at Village Circle has received its final approvals and will be breaking ground in the next few weeks. I believe. So that'll be 72 units of housing for ranging from extremely low to low moderate. And there'll be some synergy between that project and the Danco project behind it. There'll be some shared amenities and things like that. So we're looking forward to that project finally getting underway. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Shannon, are those units like family size units or?
Yeah, ranging from studios to, I know there's 2 bedrooms. There might even be a couple 3 bedrooms.
Great.
Full range.
Awesome. That's great.
Is there any other questions for Shannon on Shannon's report? Not hearing anything, we'll move on. City of Fort Bragg, Hannah, I know that the chief had asked you to attend. Do you have anything to let the group know about?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for coming. Paul from City of Point Arena. I don't see Paul. Is there any other updates from local jurisdictions? And not hearing, we're going to move on to standing committee reports. We'll go down to strategic planning. We met this last week. I'll start this and Megan can fill in any holes I leave open. We met about the emergency shelter grants and the use of the HAP funding. This is going to be covered in more detail in a topic later down below under Section E. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details of that. I know the strategic planning committee is going to get back together here shortly to talk more about conjugated and non-conjugated shelters. Megan, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, I mean, I think what we talked about is going to be quite covered in the next agenda item.
Okay. Is there any questions or public comment on my brief report?
I'd just like to add that the meeting was recorded, live streamed to YouTube. So if anyone wants to watch the recording, it is linked on the agenda.
Thank you, Veronica. I'll move on to shelters and solutions, and Angelica is not here. Sage,
We didn't meet.
you didn't meet Judy? Okay,
No.
Thank you. We'll move on to court entry discharge planning, Sage.
My brain is foggy from the holidays, I think, maybe, or something. Maybe it's overworked brain fog. So I'm trying to actually think back to, did we meet in December? Did we actually cancel our December meeting, which I vaguely think we might have, but I'll check. But I know we have something coming up, which I'm excited about, which is that the organization that submitted a response to the RFP for coordinated entry list manager is going to be attending our next coordinated entry meeting to get an idea of where we're at and what we're doing. No, Veronica's shaking her head. No. Oh, okay. All right.
No, something else. Never mind.
Okay,
We did not meet in December.
I was
That's
like,
why.
oh, don't say no, because I'm excited about them attending.
Yes, they'll be there. But we did not meet in December.
We did not meet in December. Thank you. I apologize for my fuzzy brain. I'm yeah, overworked. So they're going to be meeting with us, with the committee this month, and start the process of talking about what a list manager role would be, and what our coordinated entry system looks like right now. So I know the committee is really looking forward to the potential of having a list manager in place to take on some of the work and help us, like, be able to process coordinated entry in a more efficient, streamlined way.
And Shanna with CDC is working on a flyer for our coordinated entry access points. So hopefully that'll be coming out soonish.
Thank you, Veronica. Is there any questions for Sage?
Hey, this is Sandra Stolfi from the VA. Please, if you can invite me to the meetings as I am back from my special assignment.
Great.
Thank you, Sage.
And not seeing any other questions, we're going to move on to membership committee. Veronica?
We have not met and don't have very many members. So if anyone's interested, reach out.
Thank you, Veronica. Any volunteers? Not here. We're going to move on to HIMS performance measurement. Veronica?
Aya is actively working on our longitudinal systems analysis, or LSA report for HUD. It's our annual report that replaced the AHAR. And so that is due on Wednesday. So Aya's taken that on and has done a marvelous job with it, without Brian's support. So just wanted to recognize her extra efforts there. The committee is working on establishing a data quality and management plan, DQMP. And so our HMIS capacity building grant technical assistance staff, Melissa Michael, is working on that. And so so we're working all as a group, and we have some support with it. Aya, do you have anything to add?
Nope, working on it as we speak, actually.
Thank you, Aya and Veronica. Is there any questions for Veronica? And not
We are
seeing any
meeting-
questions.
We are
Go
meeting
ahead.
this Thursday. So if you're able to attend, I'll be sending that email out, but just as a heads up.
Thank you. We'll move on to ad hoc committee reports. Veronica, you want to update us on the point in time and hit counts?
We're making a lot of progress. We hope to have our flyer completed tomorrow afternoon, along with our final draft of the press release. We didn't want to jump on it too soon because people forget, but we also want to do it early enough to where people can get it on their calendars. So our registration portal is open. Anyone who's never participated before can go to this website and register. You can also update your registration if you're a returning user. And you can also simply go to the counting.us website and sign in. You may need to select forgot password and reset your password. And you'll want to use setup key Mendocino 23. And the website to access the volunteer registration portal is mendocino.pointintime.info. And that information is listed on your agenda. And if you would like to receive specific information more than I've shared here, please let me know and I'll send you our info. Any questions?
Any questions for Veronica?
No, so we will not have another COC meeting before the point in time count happens, right?
Correct.
Okay. I really want to encourage volunteers. I've done it for the last 2 years. That's sort of new to me. And I still think, the more people we have, particularly knowledgeable, not that all volunteers are welcome, but those who are really knowledgeable and confident driving around would be really welcome. And again, I do want to prepare us. I believe that our count is going to be quite a bit lower than it has been in the years past, because I believe that we have housed a lot of people. So I just think that we should be prepared for that, because it will be really exciting to see that data show our success.
So a couple details I should have shared and slipped my mind. We are conducting the count for the night of Wednesday, January 25th. And so that means that we're going to be going out on the morning of the following morning on Thursday, January 26th. We're starting our count this year at 9 a.m. the COC approved a different use of a different methodology approach. And so we're going to be counting the areas we know that we're certain there are folks in, and the ones that we're unsure about will be randomly selected using our point in time count, counting us tool. And so it's a little different. You don't have to get up and be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. It is, and another piece is the County of Lake is conducting their count on the same day, also starting at 9 a.m. And so I know that in the past, there's been concern about overlap between the two counties. And because we're doing them on the same day and time, that'll be eliminated.
Thank you, Veronica. Any other questions for Veronica on the point in time count? Okay, not hearing any questions, we're going to go on to board governance and protocols. Veronica, do you want to lead the conversation on the approval of the HAP funds for rounds 1 and 2 allocations?
Sure. So as Dan previously shared, the Strategic Planning Committee met last week and they reviewed the eligible uses for our HAP funding. HAP is through the state of California's California Interagency Council on Homelessness, or CAL-ICH. The funding is homeless housing assistance and prevention. And there are multiple eligible use categories that we've provided in the past and we've discussed previously. I'd be happy to provide a review if anyone would like that. The Strategic Planning Committee's recommendation is that due to the need expressed by multiple emergency shelter providers, I take that back, all of our emergency shelter providers, the Strategic Planning Committee looked at allocating 100% or 93% of rounds 1 and 2 for HAP funding to be allocated directly to the eligible use category of operating subsidies and reserves, with the remaining 7% reserve set aside for administrative costs, primarily for county staff time and resources. Megan or Dan, would you like to add to that?
Well, not only was there as we always know, we know there's a need for emergency shelters. There's also a very tight spending deadline on grants 1 and 2. It has to be funded by, Veronica, I believe, June. It has to be committed.
June 30th, 23.
23.
Encumbered, not spent. But
Encumbered, yes. Spent by 25.
Yeah, it's 25.
the first one is 2025, second one comes up 2026.
2026. So not only is there a great need for the funding, more need than there is funding, of course, as it comes with any kind of shelter operations, but there was a commitment timeline that made this the primary practical area for allocation of the COC's funding sources. Now, this is a conjunction. The county has their own COC. The county has their own HAP funding stream as well for rounds 1 and 2 that they've elected to commit to the other 3 categories that the COC didn't support. So we're supporting all 6 categories, excluding capital development, through both the COC and county participation in the HAP funding.
So there's actually 2 funding categories that is eligible for HAPS rounds 1 and 2, which are system support and trying to remember the last one off the top of my head.
Delivery of permanent housing.
Delivery of permanent housing. So those 2 aren't actually being funded by rounds 1 and 2 because we have alternative funding sources, and there's like HAP round 3, $500,000 is required to be spent solely on system support. And so both the county and the strategic planning committee felt that due to that large mandated use, that we should reserve our funding, our rounds 1, 2, and 4, not to support system support.
Is there any questions on this motion prior to asking for somebody to make it? And this just has to do with allocation of the funds to the slot.
And the exact dollar amounts to the penny are included on your agenda. And HAPs round 2, HAP rounds 3 and 4 are both over $2 million. So, but this one is only, it's less than 1.4.
Did I hear any questions? I need a motion for the recommended action on item E1A.
Sorry, I do have a question, and maybe I'm looking at the agenda, and it looks like there's 2 items for. I'm confused.
So the second recommended action line item is to how do we allocate 93% between congregate and non-congregate shelter programs. But we first have to establish how much are we okay spending it 100%, well, 93% on shelter.
Totally get it. Thank you. Sorry, I could not.
No, it's okay. It's a little messy.
No, it makes total sense now. I just wasn't connecting the dots, but thank you.
If there's no questions, we'll need a motion if the board so wants to move on this.
I don't know whether this is the time for the question. And so Dan, please just tell me no, that's a different discussion. I'm fully in support of this. What I have is that when I actually heard the numbers that, the congregate emergency shelters really need to stay afloat, what puts me in a kind of a state of fear is we have this money now, and so maybe we shouldn't even think of that. We should just think like, oh, we're happy we have this for the next till 26. But what happens afterwards? I mean, I remember how painful it was, when Buddy Eller got, defunded through, county and et cetera. And, I don't see us magically not needing these emergency shelters. But I was sort of surprised at the amount of money that obviously there aren't other funds coming in to fund this source.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And I think that COVID basically delaying the inevitable discussion that we have to have, more in the strategic planning committee about the practicality of funding emergency shelters and at what level of service that's going to be at. For the next year or so, there is some HAP funding that can be allocated to that. But the HAP funding also needs to, I don't think it's going to go over well with the state if we fund everything from rounds 1 through 4, just emergency shelters, and deal with the symptoms of a housing problem instead of dealing with the root cause. So I don't have a magical answer, and I know that's going to be an issue. I know SAGE has that concern, as well as all the shelter providers for long-term funding sources. And unfortunately, the state and the federal government loves throwing money in the matter of a disaster to help fund these things. And then, the ultimate long-term staffing is highly questionable.
Yeah. Okay.
I think just to give the rest of the group some perspective, although the strategic planning committee recommended that the COC do allocate 93% of HAPs round 1 and 2 to emergency shelter, I think this is only going to represent a little bit more than 6 months, but not even a full year of the need, I think. So that is of concern. So those discussions do need to start happening fairly quickly, even after we make this decision today.
That's correct, Megan. We're going to be issuing the funds in a 1-year contract, even though that the operating subsidies we issue may only cover, 6 months expenses.
I'm hoping they'll cover 9 months.
Yeah, it looked like we probably
6 to 9.
Yeah, pull off 9 maybe.
Definitely not enough.
And I didn't notice it as an action item, but I just wanted to remind Veronica and Dan and that we did talk about requesting a fairly quick review team to just review what those contracts were. So that's on your radar, Veronica, so that
That's on the second motion.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm jumping.
That's the second part. All we're looking for now is a motion to approve the allocation. This is just for rounds 1 and 2. Rounds 3 and 4, possibly and most likely we'll have a different allocation, as well as responder fund to a different set of RFPs.
And rounds 3 and 4 were applied to jointly with the county. And so it won't be just the COC's realm it'll have to be a collaborative decision.
It's a different process.
Yes.
Yeah.
I make the motion. This is Wind.
Thank you, Wind. Is there a second for Wind's motion?
I'll second Karen Lovato.
Thank you, Karen.
Dan, I'd like to repeat the motion in full for those on Zoom.
Go ahead.
The motion on the table is to approve our strategic planning committee's recommendation to allocate 93% of HAP rounds 1 and 2 for the HAP eligible use category of operating subsidies and reserves, and 7% for administration.
And 93% is $1,266,925, and 7% is $95,359 and change. Is there any public input on or discussion on this motion? Not seeing any. Veronica, will you roll call, please?
Please unmute when I call your name and say if yes, no, or abstain. Faith Dayton.
Abstain.
Teresa DeSimone.
Yes.
Jacqueline Williams.
Yes.
Wynn Novotny.
Yes.
Joanna Olson.
Abstain.
That reminds me, anyone who will be, any agencies applying for this funding do need to abstain from this vote. Paul Davis.
Abstain.
Karen Lovato.
Yes.
Judy Albert. Judy Albert. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes.
Sage Wolf.
Abstain.
Dan McIntyre.
Yes.
Sandra Stolfi.
Yes.
Hannah Nanez.
Abstain.
Denise Gorney.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Veronica, I think you need to abstain me.
Oh, yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Change 4th Street projects, vote to abstain, and motion still passed.
Thank you, Veronica. We're going to go into the recommended action. This is an action that Megan wanted to clarify. The way this motion was written up, it's going to actually be a little bit different. So I'll try my best to explain this, and Megan, if you want to jump in, or if you have it on top of your head right now, if you want to jump in, because.
Well, let's finish this because it's the 85-15 split, but then also talk about a brief ad hoc to help finalize the contracts for the 93% we just agreed to.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay. So this next one it comes down to splitting up the 93% funds that are allocated. And the motion as it's written is approve the Mendocino County Strategic Planning Committee recommended to use 85% of HAP funds around 1 and 2 to support existing conjugate shelter projects, and 15% be used to support existing non-conjugate shelter projects for the period of January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. So 85% of the 93% is $1,076,886, and 15% is $190,038.77.
And those exact numbers are recorded on the agenda, page 2.
I make the motion. This is Wind.
Thank you, Wynn. Is there a second for Wynn's motion so we can discuss it?
I second it.
Thank you, Judy. Is there any discussion, questions on this that I can answer, or Veronica and Megan can answer?
So just for the group as a little preview of the next one of the discussions we still need to have. The Strategic Planning Committee really spent some time talking about the pretty important value of non-congregate shelter coupled with the fairly extraordinary cost of non-congregate shelter. So I just to remind everyone, non-congregate shelter, really the code word for that is motel vouchers. A motel voucher for a client is probably $3,000 per month. We can all imagine that permanent housing is less than that. So when you really put it in that context, it's a lot of money. It's had a really unique, very important value in certain situations. So given that during the pandemic, there was a lot more openness and just availability and funding from the federal level for this kind of funding of the motel vouchers, we really got a lot of experience here at the county level, but also our community-based providers got a lot of experience as well with those programs. And so there's a discussion that needs to be had about how those expensive services are prioritized. Expensive, but important and critical. So.
Thank you, Megan. Is there any other questions or discussions before we call for a vote on this motion?
So the non-congregated shelter will be like $16,000 per month, and we're counting for all the year. And so this $16,000, what will be the average of individuals that will receive these motel vouchers that you are talking, Megan? Do you have any average in comparison that last year? How has been that?
I mean, comparison to the cost of the motel voucher program in the last year?
Yeah. How many people will receive this like per month? Assuming that you're saying that it's 190K.
Oh, way far less. So in the non-congregate shelter programs, the motel voucher programs that existed up until now included Project Room Key, which is a large program that the county funded, and our ESG contracts also allowed, Veronica, I'm correct, right? Our ESG contracts also allowed motel voucher programs. McCavan had one, Project Sanctuary has one, Ford Street has one. So no matter what we do, the 190 is not going to cover the number of people, not even close, that were covered through these other programs that are ending.
Yeah.
There were hundreds of people that had motel stays. And in my experience, and I think some of our other community-based providers that did motel-based programs, they're important and they're successful, but people are in those motels for a fairly long time before they're housed. We had people in our hotels for well over a year before they got housed. So $3,000 a month times 12 months, looking at a $40,000, $50,000 investment, that's half a staff person really, or if not more. So cost-wise, it was a lot.
Yeah.
But most of the money we've been spending on motel voucher programs has been federal money until now, actually all of it in the last year and a half. So when we're spending a different funding pool, we get to experiment in a different way.
So this is going to be like this 190K that you are talking. So that means that will not be covering definitely, the need that are in Mendocino County per month, and then how this is going to be covered.
Say that again. I'm not sure I followed the question.
So you are saying that allocation will be 190K for the non-congregate shelters. And so what about if we have more individuals that need shelters, or vouchers per month, what is going to be the backup plan to, to face this situation. Like, for example, if we have like fire situation, yes, we need more money that
Well, if there's a fire, it's a whole different situation. If there's like an actual, federal, a disaster, that's a different situation. I mean, we have to turn people away from services all the time. So, and we don't provide shelter to everyone who needs it already. So that'll be the same case. I think if you're asking how we're going to prioritize non-congregate shelter in the future, that needs a discussion, and that's what Dan's probably going to get to at our next agenda item, is to figure out how do we prioritize these expensive but really valuable limited resources that we have.
And or Sandra, make just the tough decision that realize that we can't support all these programs that have been supported under COVID, and get back to pre-COVID reality that non-congregate shelters is not a practical use of limited funding. If that's, and it's not that it's not important and not practical are two completely different conversation pieces. There's definitely not enough money to shelter everybody that needs to be sheltered.
Yeah, and so then it will be like, needs to be completed like an updated procedure or policies of how this is going to be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Track, yes, who will be the priority. Okay.
Yep.
Right. That we need to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Somebody does.
And while we were having the discussion, I ran a quick report in HMIS on our project room key, and it shows that of the 455 people served, and 9 people were excluded from the calculation, 144 people were permanently exited to a positive housing destination, or 32%. So about a third of folks went to permanent housing.
And I think when we run the report in the last year, which is when we got a lot better at it, way better. I mean, it was very chaotic in the beginning of the pandemic, but if we ran that report in the last year, I think our outcomes are going to be closer to 80%. But I'm not advocating. I mean, they have good outcomes. This was people who've been in motels for a year with like heavy case management, extremely expensive. FEMA was paying for all of it, millions of dollars. So we just don't have that opportunity anymore. And it was a lot, and we learned a lot. So the question is, how do we move forward with figuring out what we learned and what we actually have funding to do?
And a lot of that is going to require us to advocate past our own means to get continued funding for non-congregate shelter type activities, exclusive of having a COVID type emergency or a pandemic that we're dealing with.
Right.
Homelessness doesn't change just because there's a pandemic or not a pandemic. Sage?
I just had, we did, I think this community and learned a lot from the non-congregate shelter and of what helped in that situation. I would be really interested in looking at how do we apply some of the things that were learned for non-congregate shelter to our congregate shelters to see how do we improve our congregate shelter outcomes as well. Are there things that you can do in non-congregate shelter that are applicable? Are we doing them in our congregate shelters? And if we're not doing them, can we implement them? The kinds of things that were really helping that really targeted case management and things like that. I don't know all of the different things, but it popped in my head of like, how could we, if we are decreasing the amount that we're putting into non-congregate shelter, I would love to see us improve our outcomes from congregate shelter, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think that would be a really interesting conversation, Sage. And again, from what we learned about Roomkey, just really briefly, what was different is because the project was COVID specific, we had very strict rules about it. You couldn't have visitors because you're supposed to be sheltering in place alone, right? So like there was a lot of things that were probably not housing they might have been housing, I'm not exactly sure, but there was behavior expectations that we put in place for that program that are not that, because it was supposed to be a health program, right? It turned into a housing program halfway through, which was really like frustrating because it was supposed to be, health, but it turned into housing. And so, but there was some things that we learned. it would be interesting to have that conversation about what did we learn that could be applied to congregate shelter. For sure, we had heavy case management that went along with those rooms, right? So there's definitely some things that could be applicable and other things that maybe couldn't be.
And I think one thing, Sage, that we probably wouldn't be able to replicate in future too is we had a ton of new housing units, whether it be Home Key or other projects in town that were specific for homeless, those that were at risk of homelessness come online in the same process, right? And that's, while the timing seems convenient, that's timing that I don't think you can see replicated again.
I think, Dan, I would like to do this because I think you're totally right. It would be interesting. I mean, when I think through on Project Room Key, many of the people that moved to permanent housing, it was literally housing that was built during the pandemic. It's like they were waiting in a motel room for a housing project to be built. And a lot of them moved into those opportunities. So it'd be really interesting to look at that, literally moved into new stock that we just can't count on like endless projects.
No, it's, I mean, the new stock that came online takes 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Off the start. So, okay, is there any other questions or discussion specific to this allocation split of that 93%? Not hearing any public comment. Roll call, Veronica.
Okay. Please unmute. And when I call your name, please say yes, no, or abstain to the motion on the table. Faith Dayton.
Abstain.
Teresa DeSimone.
Yes.
Jacqueline Williams.
Abstain.
Wynn Novotny.
Yes.
Joanna Olson.
Abstain.
Paul Davis.
Abstain.
Karen Lovato.
Yes.
Judy Albert.
Yes.
Sage Wolf.
Sorry, abstain.
Okay. Dan McIntyre.
Yes.
Sandra Stolfi.
Abstain.
Hannah Nunez.
Abstain.
Denise Gorney.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you, Veronica. So we're going to move on to a discussion topic. We kind of touched on this in the last two a little bit. The COC needs to work on a prioritization policy for funds when we get funding for emergency shelters, because we have funding that comes in for conjugate and non-conjugate shelters. We all know that running hotel vouchers or the non-conjugate shelters is extremely expensive per head count. But rather than having a discussion every time we get funding, there needs to be some kind of solid foundation that the COC can work off of and the service providers can review so that they can understand what we're going to set as a priority so they can better plan for the futures of their organizations, right? We kind of had this discussion in the COC's strategic planning meeting the other day, but with a bunch of service providers in the room, it's awkward because they want to advocate for their own programs, and I completely respect that. But I think as an outside person that doesn't do emergency shelters, and I would just love to see enough funding for all emergency shelters and all permanent housing, but I know that's not practical. We need to, our recommendation would be to have an ad hoc committee put together that deal with just this topic. And now that may bring in some of those shelter providers to get their thoughts and some of the processes of how they do it and maybe how some of the efficiencies can be gained. But overall, from that ad hoc committee, we would bring back a recommendation of how to prioritize future funding between conjugate and non-conjugate shelters, knowing that at some point, at some level of funding both of them is not practical. And we're going to have to make a tough choice. It's not, especially right now and the funding sources we have and the advent of a possible recession coming, funding's not going to be a free game like it has been since COVID took over, right? I mean, the government spent billions of dollars on COVID relief. And there's been a lot of new programs and great programs created due to COVID. However, like all great funding from the federal government, it's not ever ending. So that's kind of the preface for this discussion. I'm open for everybody else's thoughts. I know Shannon and I kind of talked about this briefly in the strategic planning meeting, but I think it would be beneficial to have an ad hoc that tackled just this tough decision and this tough conversation between conjugate and non-conjugate shelters. And I understand both are greatly needed, but I also understand the reality of funding them both effectively. Nothing's worse than a non-effective funded program.
I would like to, yes, I agree with you, Dan. I would like that in this committee, that is at all, invite in this committee to our contractor that we have, Nation Finance, which is from the SSBF program, because they have also, they receive money from VA for motel vouchers, which is emergency housing assistance from VA. So that will be interesting that they attend to this committee so they can provide information about what experience that they have and what they are going to be providing in this year. So you can consider Nation Finance. Veronica, you have the contacts. If no, I can tell you, you can invite Mary Haynes.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Last I had reached out to Mary, she wasn't the correct contact anymore. It was Trevor, but I believe Trevor's out on leave right now. So I was going to reach out and ask you. So I'll reach out. I'll invite Mary.
Yeah, what I would say when you send this email to Mary, CC to me. So
okay.
I will coordinate. Okay.
I can do that.
Thank you.
One thought that I had while we were discussing this is a way to like create this and establish this would be an update to our emergency shelter written standards. It's all just on congregate shelter. There's no mention of it's all based on congregate shelter, and there's no mention of non-congregate shelter in the entire document. And so I think that that would be a way to establish it and distribute it.
Okay, Shannon, did you have any thoughts other than my long babbling at the start of this discussion point? It is Monday.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm in transit here. No, I'm not sure I completely followed Veronica's train of thought on the development of the ad hoc. Was that, are you suggesting that we could use an existing committee, Veronica? Or
no, I was just saying that the avenue in which the changes could be done is in the emergency shelter written standards. That's just the document.
I see. Okay. No, I don't have any additional thoughts, I guess, of my own. I can just relay that when we had the conversation at the strategic planning meeting, there were lots of different facets that kind of popped up. What about people with severe medical vulnerabilities or disabilities? And so I do think it warrants an extended conversation just based on what occurred at the strategic planning committee. That's all.
All right, thank you, Shannon. And this meeting definitely would not be just a one and done. I envision it as multiple meetings, you know, gathering information from all the service providers, and then the ad hoc committee coming back with a recommendation of a process for triaging future funding and triaging the use of that future funding through multitudes of different reasons, right? For conjugate, there might be other ways to house people in non-conjugate shelters, not using COC money. And we could possibly come up with some kind of triage tree that would help us in that allocation process. And that's just me wrapping my brain around it, because I'm not a conjugate, non-conjugate housing shelter person. I don't know the details, but I do know how to make dwindling funds last. I've been doing that for years, so. Jackie?
Not to make this more complicated, but I always feel like we should talk to the welfare to work folks too and see, you know, are they still providing motel vouchers? I mean, do we know what they are? And
Well,
so,
Not that kind of the unlimited kind they were doing during COVID.
okay. I was just thinking if we really wanted a complete picture, that might inform us if people are moving from, you know, one provider to another provider as well. But if it's a very small amount, it's probably not worth our time. But it always is interesting to me when we get somebody in treatment who at one time was working with them. And I just wonder, like, are we in coordination here? Are we going down the same path and unaware of what the other one's doing?
Yeah. It's really intertwined, complicated, and kind of interesting discussion, Jackie, especially when you come to families with children, because somebody who may be getting housing support because they were parenting their child, if their child is detained, they're no longer eligible for that housing support. So then the whole thing gets more complicated.
And the CalWorks staff that provide motel vouchers and the rapid rehousing assistance do record clients in HMIS. So we do have oversight on who's being served with them whenever we reference the system. It's really helped with our rapid rehousing case conferencing because it tells us, yes, they're engaged and yes, they're doing that. And we don't have to do a lot of research. So it's there.
Great, thanks.
Anybody else have any thoughts before I recommend to create the ad hoc? Judy?
Oh, I'm just thinking that, you know, it's interesting to me sometimes how, you know, being with all, you know, these meetings and other service providers, how sometimes we are unaware of what other providers are providing, or we didn't know that they had available to them. And I mean, and Project Sanctuary really kind of stays out of the loop because we don't participate in HMIS because of the confidentiality with domestic violence victims. So, you know, and sometimes we just find out just because the client reveals it. And I actually really tremendously appreciate when other agencies are working in collaboration with us, providing services that we probably tend to be a little bit weaker on. So that we might be providing one thing, but the other agency, like I know right now, McCavan is providing a lot of services for someone who's in our shelter, just because they do it better than we do. I mean, we actually do a lot of services in our business office and counseling and TROs and things like that, but we don't get out on the streets that much and transport clients and take them into you know, and do that personal advocacy, because we just don't, that's just not how we've designated our staff time. And so working in collaboration with other agencies who can do that while we can provide something else for their client is really helpful. But sometimes it's like, oh, we didn't know you did that.
Thank you, Judy. Veronica, what do you need from me to recommend an ad hoc? Do you want me just?
You don't need anything. You just say, I'm establishing an ad hoc. Who would like to volunteer?
I'm establishing an ad hoc to talk about this congregate versus non-congregate shelters. And I'd like to know who's going to volunteer for it that's not operating a congregate or non-congregate shelter. You guys will have your input on it, but you cannot be, it's not going to assist the conversation moving forward.
I could volunteer.
Thank you, Teresa. Shannon?
Is everybody else conflicted?
There's a lot.
There's a lot of conflicted people, yes.
Yeah, I am happy to serve on this committee. I will do my best. I feel like I'm not the subject area expert that many of you are, but that's why the rest of you can't serve. So yes, count me in.
So Dan, what about not being able to have a vote, but being able to be a participant?
Well, I think we're going to bring Judy, we're going to bring in everybody on this deal so that we can talk to you guys individually. I thought it was kind of awkward in the strategic planning meeting we had the other day about how kind of felt like it felt to me, and Shannon can correct me or Megan correct me if it's just me, that, everybody was advocating for their own agency, and not trying to down the other agencies. So we're just trying to come up with a holistic approach to how we deal with congregate versus non-congregate. That's not agency specific. Sage?
I've been chewing on this because I was at that meeting and I agree that it was awkward and hard. I think that one of the main reasons that it was awkward and hard, though, is because there were actual dollars attached to the things we were talking about. We were approaching the conversation from how are we allocating these half dollars, not from as a COC and as a community, how do we look at non-congregate and congregate shelter? And the reason why we were struggling with the conversation so much is because we don't have an established kind of practice or policy or viewpoint as a COC. I think that the conversation would go a lot easier with the providers in the room, because there are providers who do both. Like, we do both congregate and non-congregate shelter. And I don't think just because we do more congregate shelter, that doesn't mean we're not a fan of non-congregate shelter. And I think that that's true for all of our providers, that you can see the pros and cons of whatever model you're going for. And I think that on a general, like, how are we as a community approaching congregate versus non-congregate shelter projects? And like, if we do non-congregate shelter, what are the priority populations? What are the priority populations for congregate shelter? Like, that kind of conversation. I don't know how you're going to get through that conversation without the people who do the work in the room. And if we're taking the money out of it to where we're just establishing some kind of foundational stuff, I think that the conversation is going to be a lot, I wouldn't say easier, but less conflict of interest stuff. I don't know.
Good point, Sage. Veronica, what's our cap then on members? We can't have a quorum.
The only thing is a quorum of the board, and there are currently, of course, I closed that one.
Well, I guess my thought is that if this ad hoc, and then let's go back to who would be on the ad hoc, but if the ad hoc comes back with a policy recommendation on who is prioritized for non-congregate shelter, I think that Sage is right. We're not allocating funding through that policy. It's just talking about the policy part of it, and the board should be able to vote on that. But I do think that we need to leave some space for a discussion about congregate versus non-congregate without any of the providers in the room. We have to do that. It might be something like first half of the meeting includes people who provide these services, and the second half of the meeting doesn't. But it's starting to feel it's not okay that we are making funding decisions with people who are naturally deeply invested in the services they are providing. We have to figure out a way to do this, to hear the voices, and then also have the conversation from neutral parties as well.
I think that one direction to this ad hoc committee that we might want to give is, one, what you said around how are we prioritizing for non-congregate shelter. And then the second one is, when funding is available for shelter, how are we deciding, what mechanisms are we using to decide how much gets allocated to non-congregate versus congregate? And that's where we need some agreed upon mechanisms, whether it be like from the point in time count to the HIC to something like, we need some mechanisms that help us make funding decisions that are not based on any number of organizations advocating for whatever program they have going.
I
Otherwise,
would agree with that. And I would agree that the conversation also has to be about what percentage of our funding, of COC's funding, the county funding overall goes to shelter at all. Because we could put 80% of our HAP funding into shelter. And, you know, I wouldn't advocate for that. But if we don't put 80%, if they decide overall, if they, you know, and you have to collaborate with the county on this, there's some sort of decision like, I'm going to totally make up a number. So this is literally a made up number. If they said something like 20% of overall funding is going to go to shelter, congregate, and just shelter in general. This means that some of our shelter providers either have to modify what they do or find other funding sources. And it's not fair for us to keep asking these shelter providers to just every 6 months not know whether they have any money or not. So I feel like at some point, the COC and the county has to kind of make a policy decision around this so that our shelter providers can feel some sense of like, okay, now I know what I have to work with for a couple of years. And that I've been hoping we were going to get closer to that. Then I was like, oh no, we're only going to be allocating like 9 months worth. That's like hardly buying them any surety at all, right? Like I would like to give our shelter providers some sense of like what they can count on for like 18 months to 2 years. I think that would be a kind thing to do. But that conversation has to happen with non-conflicted people at some point. And that's where Dan and Jackie and Veronica, Dan's right. We've kind of met the moment now. We got to figure that out in the next 3 months or so.
It's almost like that transition. Let's assume we establish some percentage like you just suggested, and we feel good about it. We're never right the first guess. And so the other thing is the process, and maybe it's a combination of the PID information and other information where we just, where we all kind of understand. It's almost like the regulations of the game that we're in. So different providers can make decisions. One of the things that I went through with Buddy Eller is that you can start minimizing the time you're open. You can, exit people so they have no place to be during the time. I mean, there is a way you do that. But one of the things that I learned from that is there is a minimum viable definition that we have to agree on. What is shelter? It's kind of like, if you're the library and you're not open, even though you have books, you're not really the library. And that was the way I was feeling at the shelter. We have a shelter, but now we're so unfunded that we can only open for these certain periods. I mean, it just felt like we really weren't delivering shelter, right? And so I think along with the percentages, kind of defining that minimum viable. So the poor people that do this work don't have to completely reinvent their business model every 3 to 6 months.
Shannon?
Yeah, it's a really tricky thing because not only are we trying to make these decisions, but we're trying to match these dollars from different funders with various projects and programs and whatnot. And to Jackie's point, it is going to change, it'll evolve, but we do need something to start with. I really appreciated Megan's idea where we do some kind of a joint meeting and we do get input from the providers. I think there's a tremendous amount of value in that. I would benefit from that personally. I have experience with the strategic plan. I want to make sure that whatever percentage or plan that we come up is consistent with that plan as well. But yeah, I support some kind of joint meeting where we do hear directly from the service providers.
Well, I'm wondering also, that, well, and maybe this would just be part of the ad hoc committee anyhow, is like, so many of whatever we want to look at in terms of the ongoing causes of homelessness for certain groups of people, whether that is due to mental health issues or substance abuse issues, it just seems that we have to get those other pieces of the county involved also in terms of how are they going to participate. I mean, I think that the money inflow that we've had and the intensive case management that many folks have been provided has really helped. Everything that people have said here already at this meeting, this has been a pretty darn successful 2 years with the new housing, the people keeping sheltered. But, one of the things I know that just remains one of the biggest community concerns always is seeing people on the streets in every single community. That part has not waned in any way. That's what you hear all communities talking about. So anyway, I think it's wonderful that we have this ad hoc committee. I think that as many, people that we could get to, also buy in and create kind of a vision for what we might do when the funding gets cut, which we know is going to happen, would be helpful.
I can't make a motion.
Well, there's no motion to be made. This isn't an action item. So, yeah, we don't need to.
My schedule's hard to work with, but just as far as non-shelter operator options, I'd be willing to participate as long as I can find a time that works.
Thank you, Karen.
We would also like to participate when that meeting comes.
Thank you, Hannah.
So Hannah, I will point out that you work for the city of Fort Bragg and you do have a non-congregate shelter program. I mean, so I'm not sure you'd be able to participate in the decision-making part of it, but certainly the input part.
Well, we're going to have to split this really in 2 spots, Megan. I think we're going to have
Yeah.
the committee, and then we're going to have to invite to the first part of all these meetings, the providers. Don't you think that would be a good way to?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I mean, we can have the meeting and we can decide at some point, we could go a different direction, but at some point, the COC is going to need to make a decision about how much money is going to be allocated to shelters. And then the shelters are going to have to figure out how to work with that. We've got to do it. We have to do it. It's not fair to them to have them have to request funds every 6 months. It's ridiculous. It's not a good way to operate a business.
So
Dan,
obviously I'm a shelter provider. And I have to run and go. I can't stay for the rest of the 10 minutes of this meeting, but count me in for the provider side of that conversation.
We did before you offered, Sage.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sage.
2 other people that are here today that wouldn't be conflicted are Faith and Wind.
I'm very happy to be involved to the extent that I'm able. This is Wind.
Thank you, Wind. So we'll put you on the list.
I had the same response to the extent that I'm able. So I can help.
Thanks, Faith.
Well, that's 5, not including you, Dan.
I think it's enough. An ad hoc doesn't mean, right? It's very loose.
That'll work for now.
I'll sit in too as the agency side.
Okay. Yeah.
And worst case scenario, Veronica, if this thing doesn't work, then we'll just change how it works and move it.
Just a reminder that please, you are going to coordinate with Nation Finance, yes?
Yes, and Sandra, I'll reach out to Mary as part of the second step with the providers.
Please. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So before we move on, Dan, I do have one other request about HAP stuff. If we're ready to move on.
Go ahead.
We need to establish an ad hoc for the HAP shelter funding requests. I can do that separately, but I'm wondering if anybody's willing to volunteer.
I'll volunteer.
I'll volunteer.
I don't know what I'm volunteering for, but
We received requests from the shelter providers for the HAP funding, and we have to decide how to honor those.
All right,
And-
yeah, I'll volunteer.
Okay. Any others?
Wind was on there.
Yes, I got Wind and you. And I'll reach out to others.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're at 3 o'clock almost, so we're gonna move on to funding. I know there's a whole bunch of stuff listed down here under funding. And I also noticed that there's not a lot of updates. So Veronica, I'm just gonna ask you to update or let us know if there's no updates on item 1 for COC. Oh, actually, see updates.
So
Is
I
there
have
actually updates for
updates on
ESG?
3 programs.
Okay, can you update us on ESG?
Yeah, so ESG is going good. Many of our emergency shelter providers have exhausted their funds. Most of the rapid rehousing providers are going strong, still have quite a bit of funding. I know that there's 1 or 2 that are getting kind of low, but that's what the coordination is about. So we're at 64% spent as of September 30th of last year. So, and I know that we have quite a bit more, so we're chugging along.
Okay.
For
Is there any questions for the ESG stuff? I'm gonna ask for questions in between.
Okay.
The comment on the ESG items? And not hearing, anything, just go to HAP, which we covered briefly.
I wanted to share that the HAP4 allocations were released on Friday. I did forward the email out to the full COC mailing list, but I wanted to make sure that I called attention to that for the public. And we should be receiving our round 3 remainder payment in the next month or so. I'm this close to having the standard agreement completed.
And we're doing a new RFQ for rounds 3 and 4, correct?
In the future, yes.
In the future.
Yeah, we have to figure out what funding categories and stuff.
So
first.
next year.
Yeah. So we were
Okay.
actually talking about doing an RFP for other activities besides emergency shelter for HAP rounds 1 and 2. But since we decided only to put it under shelter, that's not needed any longer. Unless the county wants to do something with its HAP round 1 and 2.
Wait, what's not needed anymore, Veronica?
So we were talking if the COC was going to allocate HAP rounds 1 and 2 to more than just emergency shelter, so like landlord liaison or anything like that, we were going to need another RFP because we felt that those things were outdated, that the RFQ that we had, didn't really make sense. But since we're not immediately going to fund anything beyond the shelters with HAP rounds 1 and 2 for the COC, we don't need that RFQ in the immediate.
Right. We don't need a new RFP for you to move forward with these contracts we're talking about. But Dan, I do think in the near future, we're going to start talking about a new RFP, probably for services beginning July 1.
For round 3 and 4.
Yes.
That's correct. I just wanted to make sure all the service providers knew there's going to be a new RFP coming out for round 3 and round 4. Whether we include them both in one round, I don't know, but there will be new ones coming out.
Yeah.
So any questions on HAP from Veronica or public input? Not hearing you. Can you update us on cash funding?
Yes, we've been doing a lot of state reports. Megan has been primarily taking the lead on that so that it actually gets done because ESG just takes all my time with reports. So cash, we're in compliance with our funding source, and we're looking at using the $98,000 set aside for system improvements for a coordinated entry system list manager. And so that was what Sage had mentioned earlier in the beginning of the meeting about coming the presentation to the Coordinated Entry Discharge Planning Committee. And so it's the funding that would be used for that contract comes from cash. Megan, do you have anything to add about the reports?
No, no, I'm looking forward to, we should be able to close out cash. It's probably one more fiscal year, but I think we'll be done. Same way we kind of got done with heat, we'll be able to be done with cash within a year, which will be nice.
When I did the RFP for the Coordinated Entry List Manager, we only received one response. And the county requires, in order for it to be considered competitive, to have received at least a minimum of 2 responses. I have an email into our RFP team asking what do I need to do next? And I believe I'll be filling out an exception to bid. But so that RFP didn't pan out the way that we had hoped.
Thank you, Veronica. Any questions on cash from the board? Public input on cash? Not hearing any. We're going to move on to projects. Veronica, do you want to go over the Shared Housing Institute?
Yeah, so the Shared Housing Institute is one of the national leaders in training staff, housing staff on how to establish a shared housing model in communities. They offer their trainings in cohorts, and it's a 6-week long training. There's 6 sessions in total, so it's one per week on Thursdays, and each is from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, so 2, 1, 12, 11 to 12:30 Pacific. I'm wondering if there is any interest from our case managing agencies in pursuing this. I know we've discussed it in the past and everyone was caught up with COVID response, and it was a not right now, but soon. And so because I received this announcement, I wanted to bring it up with the group. And I'm very sad Sage had to go because they know a lot about this.
Do you have any idea when this is to begin?
It's February 2nd through March 9th, every Thursday. There is a $400 cost per staff person, but I was considering the option of using HAP3 system support funding for that, but since there has to be collaboration on that, maybe that's not an option. But so the funding to cover this, to attend, I would hope that the COC or the county would be able to provide that funding. So this isn't asking each agency to fork out funding. It's, is there interest in pursuing this?
I have interest.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll send it out in a separate email to our housing case managers, the providers, the managers for each agency, and I'll do it that way. I was just hoping that we might have a discussion here.
So Veronica, could you just say, so is this more for how an agency runs a shared housing, or how you educate clients on how to do shared?
How to run it, how staff can operate a shared housing model to assist clients in becoming rehoused. So
Okay.
rooming situations, things like that.
Okay.
So working with a landlord to accept a lease for each tenant, and instead of per unit, things like that.
Okay, well, that's useful.
It would be highly useful.
Mhm.
I know it would be very useful. It's just whether or not our teams have enough time to dedicate to this intensive training.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, do you have any thoughts? You guys operate a program. with rapid rehousing. You're muted.
Drives me nuts. I don't know. Can you be more specific?
Well, it's a shared housing. It's a training for case managers on
Right.
how to do shared housing, how to
Yeah.
interact with, how to gather information from clients, how to do roommate matching, how to engage with a landlord, you know, all of that really intensive work. It's a training on how to do that.
Well, I think that's a good idea.
Mhm.
That's important. We could
Do you
use-
guys have, yes, but do you have the capacity at this time for your rehousing staff to participate?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
So that's Fort Street and Hospitality Center are interested.
Probably Project Sanctuary.
Okay.
I'd be really surprised if RCS wasn't. I know Sage had to go, but
Right. And really, I know Sage is a huge proponent of this type of work. It's just whether or not there's capacity in the staffing right now.
No, Veronica, you can just reach out directly to those agencies. I know from being a landlord that shared housing is complicated and complex. And from a regulatory standpoint, anything that's funded with, you know, federal funds, multiple leases in one building is impossible to implement. So private landlords probably an easy effect, but you know, unfortunately, the majority of the housing we provide, it's impossible to do multiple leases in one unit.
Yeah. And Teresa, this is something that I would hope Danielle would be able to attend, because this is a lot of what she does.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking at it and reading it a bit more, and I think that I'll have a discussion with her. I would think that she would want to attend this. And yeah, it's a lot of landlords, private landlords will sometimes do shared housing, but again, they have to have separate leases. And so that's where it becomes an issue, because if somebody moves out, then they can only get that half of the rent amount. But if there was a strategy to get somebody in there quickly, that might, you know, sway a landlord.
Yeah.
All right,
One of the things that I learned about that situation is that if I have a roommate, my roommate moves out, I'm really motivated to find somebody I want to live with. So that argument for some landlords is really valid rather than leave it up to a chance. And so it is a risk for them, but if the communication's pretty good, it's often a help to the landlord, but it's just kind of catch as catch can.
All right, we'll move on to announcements. Is there any announcements from any agencies or general members that are on the call, on the meeting?
Say that again.
Is there any announcements, Denise, or anything that
No.
for any of the agencies?
Drew, can you announce your food bank total for everybody so we can whoop whoop?
Yes, let me find it. The final for the 2022 food bank drive was $159,930 donated to the food bank.
Wow. Drew, I noticed that total. I can't remember, maybe it was in the paper or something. What do you think made it so high this year?
Luck? I have no idea.
Yeah, I think we
needed it.
Yeah, but I think during COVID, I think people understood what we do better. We also had a benefactor who has given us $10,000 in the past, gave us 50.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So that was the boost and got us rolling.
Because it didn't feel like you did like a whole lot more than you normally do in terms of advertising. And I saw that. So I was like, wow,
No, we
that's
didn't.
awesome.
No,
Yeah.
we didn't. Literally all I do is go back to the people that have given generously in the past, give them a brief update and ask if they'll give again. And I think a lot of our donors are, it's word of mouth, you know, and so I was just, it just feels so good because as Dan mentioned, I do believe that things are going to get tighter, and having those extra dollars, we can maybe help that.
Especially on the food bank side, because the dollar's not getting you guys as much as you were getting in the past, nor is there the excess
Right.
that we've seen in the past. I know I figured that out when I fainted and bought an 18 pack of eggs this weekend. I about fell over in the grocery line.
There's a whole egg thing going on.
Yeah.
I know, but it's just, you know, if you look at the staples, I sit there and I wonder, you know, I just wonder how people are going to survive if this doesn't change. It's just, not only is there a housing crisis, but, you know, there's an affordability crisis for the basic essentials of households.
One of the things that I've noticed is that the amount of fruit and vegetables we get from Redwood Empire is a little less now. And we've been thinking it's because of the drought. Farmers aren't planting as much, and there's also a farm worker shortage. And so all those things kind of came and hit us at one time. So we normally, and again, they still give a generous amount, but in the past they were able to provide more. I'm just hoping this big rain kind of at least solves the drought part of that. Because, you know, farmers that they are, you know, they buy all the overage. If farmers aren't planting because they don't have water or they don't have workers, that's our overage that's not going to be available. So I'm hoping that trend stops.
Thank you, Jackie.
Sure.
If there's no other announcements, our next meeting is going to be February 27th at 1:30 on Zoom. Megan, I assume you haven't got any feedback from county council and if we have to go back into in-person meetings yet?
No, and Veronica, if that happens, it's actually not for a year. I was a little wrong about that. So there's still I think the new rules are actually, was that right, Veronica? January 2024. So I guess they gave us a lot of lead time.
We have until next year to figure it out. Okay. If not, there's no other announcements. Thank you all for coming. We'll see everybody on the 27th at 1:30.
Dan, can you stay on for a quick